Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Grosvenor, and I'm here with UAPMed conducting the Experiencer interview series. The UAPMed Experiencer interview series focuses on the physical effects, psychological effects, and social impact from UAP exposures and events. UAPMed seeks to help experiencers find their voice and overcome the stigma that has for decades hindered the critical discussion of UAP interactions with humanity. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this video belong solely to the speaker and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of UAPMed, its employees, or its volunteers. All medical references are for informational purposes only. This is not a consultation or therapy session. This content can be triggering for some. Viewer discretion is advised. Today, I would like to welcome Mr. Robert Salas, retired United States Air Force officer and experiencer of the 1967 Malmstrom Air Force Base UFO incursion. Hello, sir, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Sean. It's my real pleasure to be with you and talk about my experiences again and see if I can inform and educate uh, in any way I can.
Absolutely. So let me tell our audience a little bit about you. Robert Salas is a graduate of the 1964 U.S. Air Force Academy class and served for 7 years on active duty. He worked as a weapons controller, flew target drones, commanded intercontinental ballistic missiles as a launch officer, and worked as an Air Force missile propulsion engineer on the Titan III program. From 1971 through 1973, he worked as a safety and reliability engineer for Martin Marietta Aerospace and Rockwell International on space shuttle design proposals. From 1974 until his retirement in 1995, he worked for the Federal Aviation Administration as an aircraft structures certification engineer. From 1991 through 1993, he served as an FAA delegate to the U.S. Embassy in Indonesia, advising government on aircraft certification. From 1998 through 2016, he worked as a mathematics teacher. In 2001, he gave testimony at the International Disclosure Project for his direct experience with the UFO incursion at the Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967. In 2005, he published the book Faded Giant with co-author James Klotz, which details his UFO experience at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1967. On September 27, 2010, he co-sponsored a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where he and 6 other ex-military witnesses testified to the reality of the UFO incidents at U.S. nuclear weapons bases. In May 2013, he participated in the citizens' hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. In 2013, he published Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, providing new details on his experience with the phenomenon. In October 2021, he organized another press conference with 3 other ex-military witnesses on the connection between UAP and nuclear weapons incidents. In June 2022, he testified to a special session of the Senate of Brazil. In September 2023, he testified to the House of Deputies Legislature of Mexico. Mr. Salas has spoken at international conferences in over 15 countries, including Norway, France, England, Ireland, Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, South Africa, Costa Rica, Peru, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. He has been publicly speaking about the UFO incursion at Malmstrom Air Force Base since 1996. He holds a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology in 1969 and a master's in education from the University of Washington in 1998. Sir, in addition to the impressive background we just heard, please tell us a little bit more about you and your experience at Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Yeah, already know where to start. I was trained as a missile launch officer in 1965. My training started, I was assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base in August of 1966. I became a crew member with Colonel Frederick Mywald. in let's see, early 1960. Well, I'm sorry, late 1966, and in on March 24th, 19 pardon me, 1967, we were on duty at the what we call the Oscar flight. Now, general description, Malmstrom is located at Great Falls, but we had uh, missile launch facilities, which we call launch control centers, at 15 locations throughout the state of Montana. Many of them are still there to this day. Oscar Flight was located about 100 miles to the east of Great Falls, uh, and near a little town called Roy, Montana. Um, we would go on, when we went on duty, we would be on duty for 24 hours. After relieving the crew on duty, we would uh, have to be alert. One of us would have to be alert at all times, of course, because of the mission we had. We had 10 nuclear missiles under our command at Oscar Flight. And all the control systems, I want to emphasize, were underground with us we had an underground capsule location for our function. It was supposed to be a hardened site, meaning if there was a nuclear blast overhead, should have survived that. So, of course, that was never tested, but that was the theory. Uh, and we were required to stay within the capsule the entire time. We could not locked in. We could not open the huge door we had that secured the capsule facility. As I said, we had all the controls for launching missiles and the equipment to support the missiles down there, 60 feet underground.
Uh, so you were 60 feet underground, and at what point did you learn that there was some sort of activity?
Well, sometime in the evening, I was in command of the site. My commander was taking a rest break, uh, and I get a phone call from the what we call the flight security controller or the main guard upstairs. We had about 6 guards up there that, of course, were responsible for security of the facility. Uh, and he told me we've been seeing strange lights in the sky flying overhead. They've been making strange maneuvers. It would fly very fast, stop in midair, reverse course, make 90-degree turns very sharply, and there was no engine noise. And then he added, "These are not aircraft, sir. These are not aircraft that I know about." And and that was the message. I even made a little joke at him. I said, "You mean like UFOs?" Uh, because indeed we had had reports in the local newspapers that week of UFO sightings or strange lights in the sky, reported by citizens of Great Falls. So he said, "I can't explain it, sir, except that I know they're not aircraft." Uh, and so I thanked him for the report. And this was not intended to be any kind of a joke. He didn't laugh about it. Um, it was a serious report. I thanked him and said, well, let me know if something more happens with these lights. And we hung up. 5 minutes later or so, 5 to 10 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he's screaming into the phone. He's clearly frightened and was babbling. I had a hard time understanding what he was trying to tell me. But then when I calmed him down, he said, I've got all the guards out here with their weapons drawn, and we're looking at a glowing red orange light, pulsating at times, very bright, and it was hovering just above the front gate, and scared to death. But he said, what do you want me to do, sir? And of course, I was dumbfounded by this report, but now I was taking it very seriously. He was clearly upset, frightened, and I think I just told him, I said, make sure nothing enters the fenced area. We had a large fencing, tall fencing all around the facility. Uh, and I said, don't let anything in, and just make sure the facility is secured. And then he said, one of the guards got injured. I have to go, sir. So he hung up the phone. Uh, and at that point, I felt uh, my feeling was that we were under some sort of an attack. Uh,
Let me ask you something here. So you're 60 feet below. He calls you to make an initial report, and then 5 minutes later he calls and he's clearly very upset. And then there are several other soldiers that report to the location. Approximately how many soldiers were up top that had visual on the object?
yeah, these were security guards, and we had six assigned to the facility. So that's all we had. So six, seven people with their weapons drawn at this object. Now, whether or not they fired at it, I don't know because of they clamped down on security right after that. But the next thing I did is I actually looked over my board, my status board that showed the status of the missiles. They were all green at that time, and then I went over to wake up my commander who was taking a rest break. We had a little cot down there, and started to tell him about the phone calls, and all of a sudden, before I could say much, we had a large alarm go off in the capsule, and we both knew what that meant. It meant one of the missiles had gone uh, unlaunchable or no go. We both looked over at the status board, and then all 10 of the missiles went down. They went from a green status or go status to a red light no go status. And we both jumped up and grabbed our checklists. We had checklists for everything, um, and started going through the process of trying to find out what the problem was. We had a method of querying each missile to find out, what the fault entailed, and they were all reading out guidance and control system failure. So,
So let me
and
ask you, let me ask
yeah,
you about the weapon system going down. Is that something that you've experienced at any time in the past?
no,
Are
no,
you,
I was there. I was there for 3 years as a launch officer, and never had more than one missile go down for any reason. At times, there would be a complete power failure, and there would be a short period where the generator would take over and bring power back to the missile, but we never had more than one go down at any time. So this was very unusual. We also had a couple of lights for what we called incursions, possible incursions into the launch facility area. The missiles themselves were at these launch facilities that were located about a mile or two away from our central location as a launch control center. So I had to call upstairs to send guards out to those sites and I did. And meanwhile, my commander called the command post to report our incident. Um, when I talked to the guard again, the same guard had reported before. I asked about the object, and he said it had just flown off just as I was making this call. And so obviously the object was there at the time the missiles were disabled. Um, I ordered him to send two guards teams out to those two sites and to report back. Um, and then I've hung up the phone again, and I did ask about the guard that was injured. He said it was a cut on his hand. I never got a clear uh, explanation as to how he got this cut. We did have barbed wire around the fenced area, but he also may have jammed his weapon and cut his hand trying to fix that. I just don't know at this point. I did hear from later on when I was researching this further from another airman who was in the barracks when these guys went back home that night, back to the base the next day, really. Um, and he said he heard uh, about the cut to this airman's hand, and he didn't recall either whether it was a problem with his weapon or the barbed wire, but he heard both rumors. At any rate, I did get confirmation in writing on that. But I hung up the phone, and then my commander turns to me after talking to the command post at Great Falls at Malmstrom. And he said the same thing happened at another flight. And I thought he meant the same thing that evening. But as it turns out, it had happened 8 days earlier. That was the Echo flight incident, which was very similar to what happened to us. They lost all 10 of their missiles during UFO sighting over their missile sites. So within 8 days, we lost 20 missiles. By lost, I mean they were temporarily disabled. There was no damage done to any of the missiles or any of the systems, the equipment, the hardware. There was no physical damage. What happened?
Let me ask you very quickly. So there's no damage, and there are 6 to 7 soldiers with their weapons drawn. The injury that occurred to the one officer, there was no report of any interaction with the object. It may have been from the weapon jamming or the barbed wire. And you're 60 foot below, and who else was with you at that time?
Colonel Frederick Mywald, retired. He's deceased now, but he was the crew commander, let's say.
And was there anyone else with you at
No, there were just two of us.
Okay, just the two of you. Okay. And approximately how long did this encounter last?
Well, I'd say about total time was probably less than a minute, 30 seconds or so.
And given the additional event, as you mentioned that you were in that capacity for 3 years, and this had happened on one other occasion with one missile silo, is that correct?
Yes, we had one other occasion where one missile went down, but it was due to a complete power failure. The weather sometimes got pretty bad there with ice, snow, rain, and we may have lost. Normally, our power came from Montana Power, but we also had a backup generator, which came on automatically, and we had battery power also in case we lost the generator. So We had triple redundancy with power, but on one occasion there was a missile that lost power temporarily, and then the generator came back on and brought the missile back up. In our instance, the one I just described to you, there was no loss of power, none at all. So uh, extrapolating on the situation, this object would have sent a signal, would have had to send a signal through 60 feet of earth and concrete and penetrate these triply shielded cables that we had between our location and the launch facility where the missiles were, uh, and send a particular signal to a particular piece of hardware called a logic coupler, which was a part of the guidance system that we used on the missile. We had inertial guidance. We didn't have GPS at that time. So we had, when the missiles were launched, they were, of course, pre-programmed to launch in a certain direction and etc. But we had gyroscopes and accelerometers, things like that, that would calculate the speed, direction that the missile was going and make any corrections based on those calculations. And this logic coupler was kind of an onboard computer that would make those calculations and adjustments in flight. At any rate, Boeing was able to simulate this failure mode on this piece of hardware on a bench test during their investigation of what happened. This is a possible explanation for what occurred, not only in our case, but in the Echo flight situation. Because most of the material we got back, I'll explain later on when we talk about the documents that we retrieved from the Air Force.
Sure. So you were talking about the ensuing investigation, but I want to go back to, the fact that in the other incident that you're aware of where this occurred, there was adverse weather conditions that were conducive to a power failure. There was a documented power failure, and there were diagnostics that showed that there was the cause of the missile silo going down, and the other incident was due to a power failure. In your incident, there was no such weather or power failure, and the diagnostics did not support any internal failure that
That's
you were aware of.
correct. That's
Okay.
correct. I want to make a point of that. And it was confirmed in one of the documents we received that uh, the Air Force confirmed that it was an external source uh, that sent whatever signal they sent to shut that resulted in the shutdown of these missiles. It was external, not internal.
That's concerning. And given that realization and the response of the soldiers, even one becoming injured for unknown reasons at that time, what were your immediate concerns as to, what did you think was going to happen?
Well, I was concerned with the safety of the men upstairs, of course. I thought we were under some sort of an attack, but when I talked to the security guard, the third time, I guess, he said the object had left and there was no more problem that they had upstairs. So no one else got injured for any reason, and everything was fine. So that helped to calm us down a little bit, and I was no longer really concerned that we were under an attack.
So, okay, this incident, nevertheless, even though your concerns may have been allayed for the time being, I would imagine that there was some sort of follow-up investigation. Can you tell me a little bit about what the response was in terms of the investigation, official or unofficial?
Okay, well, uh, let me explain what happened next. So, we were waited to be relieved that next morning, and we were. I think at that point, some of the maintenance crews had started to come out to the sites and go through their procedures to bring the missiles back up on alert status. But after we were relieved, we were ordered to uh, go directly to our squadron commander's office. Um, and so they sent a helicopter for us. We flew back, um, reported to the squadron commander, an old World War II pilot who had seen a lot of action during World War II. He was uh, very professional. And first thing I asked him was, what the heck was that? Was it some sort of Air Force exercise that we experienced? He said, absolutely not. Um, so we ruled that out. It was not an Air Force exercise in readiness or anything like that. And there was another man with him from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and he just shoved a paper at us and said, sign here. What's this? And he said it describes the incident you experienced and that you are not to ever speak about it under penalty of prosecution um, uh, for disclosing this information. Well, I myself reject. I mean, I didn't. I objected because we already had above top secret clearance. All he has to do is tell us not to talk about it, and we'll follow orders. But he insisted that we sign, so we both signed this non-disclosure agreement, which was very specific on some of the penalties that would accrue if we did speak about it to anyone. We couldn't speak to even anyone in the Air Force about it. Um, uh, and so and then we were dismissed. Um, and of course, the next time we went on alert status uh, to go out to the site again, we were expecting a debrief on what was going on in the field, what had they discovered in their investigation of our incident and the other incident, and we were never debriefed. Nobody ever talked about it again. I was there for another 2 years and on duty, and it was never talked about at all.
So
Uh,
let me, this that's got to be extremely stressful to have something so significant happen and then to be told just don't talk about it. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you are dealing with an unknown security threat as well as the emotional effects of your soldiers who had a direct confrontation with this object. In in light of the NDA, and in light of, despite the witness accounts, was there any evidence or other corroborating information that you had that uh, that you had to sit on, other than what other people told you? Was
well,
any evidence collected that you were aware of that that could potentially be tracked?
not at the time. Uh, Later on, uh, when I decided to go public and speak about this, and I can go through that whole process. Uh, I was able to contact individuals such as um, uh, the people that ran the Boeing investigation and others that corroborated what occurred, like the maintenance crew chief uh, that brought our missiles back up on alert, and another incident that occurred with a UFO sighting by a truck driver that same evening, which validated a couple of important data points, such as the date that our incident occurred and the fact that all 10 of the missiles were disabled. So I've got supporting evidence for much of what I've told you. I've got audio tape of the Echo Flight commander during his incident, confirming what happened and confirming the UFOs. I've got audio tape of my commander, Fred Mywell, before he passed, um, confirming what happened during our incident, confirming what I just told you, and other documents. If people want to see some of the evidence that I have, I'll refer you to my website, spiralgalaxy.org, and also my YouTube channel, uh, BobSalas at Giant Head 3 is my YouTube channel. And I've got uh, more complete explanation of people involved, etc. Um, and the cover up, the Air Force cover up of the facts at the time, because they did not want to alert the Condon investigators, which the Condon investigation was ongoing at that time, and they did not want to alert them to these incidents because it would ruin the whole objective of the Air Force was to try to get out of dealing with UFO reports.
So, eh, obviously, there was a lot going on at that time
Right.
with respect to the government's awareness of this and the expectation that you not talk about it, despite being confronted directly with it and then having to deal with these effects. Other than the shock of something so extraordinary, um, did you experience any physical effects from this experience?
No, I had no physical effects. Um,
Or were you
of
afforded the
course, I
opportunity to
was.
be, were you afforded the opportunity to be examined just as a precaution?
No, I didn't have any sense of an illness or injury or anything like that from what had happened. Of course, I was very curious now about uh, this whole subject of UFOs after it happened, and that curiosity stayed with me. And the fact that we were not debriefed on the ongoing investigations and the potential for um, other future incidents that might occur similar to ours. I was, very curious about that, and so I was very frustrated and disappointed that we didn't get any debrief on any of that. And we knew it was going on. We knew um, there was a lot of interest in that.
I want to talk a little bit about that. And you mentioned the frustration. Again, this is an intense experience. What were the emotional effects on you following this exposure? Did you experience any symptoms of, of like fear, anxiety, uh, difficulty sleeping, anything that might indicate a traumatic experience that might not have been apparent in the immediate after effect?
Uh, to be honest, the uh, I did not have any fear around this either during or after the incident. What happened was, however, the next morning after the incident, uh, I was awakened by my wife and said there was a phone call for me. I got up and it was the guards that had been up top during the incident wanted me to come down and meet with them at the base and discuss what had happened. And of course, I was curious to learn more about their perspective on what they experienced. Uh, I
How far
really,
after the incident was this?
this was the next day, the next
The next
morning,
day. Okay.
and they were desperate to speak with me, thinking that I might know something about what the heck they saw. Of course, I didn't. I was in the dark as much as they were, but I had to tell them that I could not meet with them because I had signed this NDA, which uh, obliged me not to speak to anyone about it, including Air Force personnel.
How did that affect you, knowing what they must have been going through that had to levy some sort of an emotional
Now, that did have
burden?
an emotional effect on me. It really did. I hated to disappoint them because I was the officer in charge, and they were looking for answers. They had a lot of questions, and I'm sure I couldn't have answered all their questions, but uh, I was terribly disappointed that I could not speak with them. And that motivation carried through with me for the next 27 years, so that when I did think I had the opportunity to go public, uh, that memory of disappointing them uh, spurred me on to go public, me to go public, gave me the motivation to do so.
Sure that that was helpful once you were finally able to come forward and talk to the extent that you were comfortable during the time that you were, holding all this information in and taking into consideration the effect that it was having on others. Did you have any concerns for your own mental health? Was this getting to you at any point in time? Did this get to you?
Uh, no, but again, I had a newfound curiosity about the whole subject of UFOs, and how many more times this had happened. And as a result, other people contacted me about um, things that had happened. When I was able to come forward, and people knew I was researching my incident and thoroughly. I was starting to get people calling me and telling me about their incidents at military bases. And so I have accumulated more facts and more information about that, um, which is satisfying. I mean, it shows that there seemed to be an ongoing effort by these objects to uh, shine a light on nuclear weapons, our nuclear weapons.
That's very
And
stressful. The prospect of nuclear war is already a very stressful situation. And
absolutely, yeah.
and being on the site where a nuclear warhead may have to be launched is a whole nother level of stress. Then to have an unknown threat come in and disable the weapons and then they just go back on for unknown reasons, that stress just expands. So I understand that you found a way to manage this to where it didn't affect you as severely, but your fellow soldiers did convey quite a bit of stress. To your knowledge, did anyone seek any sort of mental health assistance to cope with this?
Uh, well, uh, I'll mention a couple of things. One is my commander, Fred Mywald, informed me that some of these guards later on, after I was able to speak with him, this was many years, decades later, um, he informed me that some of those guards refused to go back on guard duty because of the fear and stress they had undergone. Um, um, so that was definitely a factor with them, their mental health. And one of the guards I got a report on, I've got it in writing, uh, became so stressed out uh, being on duty during another sighting uh, that he went AWOL, was located in a nearby town, uh, basically had a nervous breakdown and was wandering around the town aimlessly. So it for some of these airmen that had seen these things up close and uh, it was a very serious mental breakdown issue with them.
Sure. And so, in looking back, what were your personal needs following this encounter? What would you have liked to have happened, uh, following this encounter for yourself?
Well, I would have liked the Air Force to have confided in us. Like I said, we had above top secret. We were responsible for the proper maintenance and operation of these weapons. And of course, uh, we were told over and over these were critical deterrence weapons that we needed during this Cold War that we were going through with Russia and China. Um, and so I personally felt like the Air Force was not being honest and fair with the crews, missile crews, and so that was a big disappointment, which again uh, um, carried on to motivate me when I went public to continue the fight for the truth of these incidents.
So, as you were committed to share what you experienced out of a concern for, I'd imagine, national security, as well as the personal safety of your fellow soldiers, were there any social effects, following the encounter, such as stigma, you know, and when did you start to tell people about what happened? Was it right away or was it later? And tell us a little bit about how
Yeah,
that affected you.
yeah. All right. So uh, in 1994, well, 1971, I resigned my commission in the Air Force and went into civilian life. And first, I went to work for Martin Marietta and then Rockwell International on their spatial designs. And then I went to work for the FAA. And in 1994, I was thinking about retiring from the FAA, and the only thing I could think of what I wanted to do was to teach. So I went to get my teaching degree, a master's degree in education at the University of Washington. I happened to be in their bookstore and happened to notice a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good, which was an interesting title. I picked the book up, opened it up, and happened to open up to, and this is true, I happened to open up to page 301 of that book. And that was the only page in the entire book, which was about a 500-page book. The only page that talked about UFOs shutting down missiles in Montana near Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1966 and 67. So that was shocking to me because I thought, the Air Force had stated to me that this would be a highly classified incident, and no one was ever to talk about it again. I signed the NDA, but here it was in print in this book. I can explain how it got there later, but uh, so I was pretty excited that day. I went home and told my wife about my incident for the first time in 27 or 25 years. This was my second marriage, but and one of her friends who had happened to be with her at the time suggested I contact Mutual UFO Network and submit a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, for more information about this incident, which seemed to be open now and no longer classified because it was being written about in a book in a bookstore. So
It has to be interesting. So here you are, begrudgingly following the orders that you were given, honoring the NDA, and here someone writes a book talking about the very incident that you were directly involved with. And in the,
exactly,
and in the meantime, you're trying to find a way to share this information with the public and the respective service members in the command who have the authority to address this problem. What was the reaction to your efforts to bring this out initially?
well, we did follow through and submit a FOIA request to the Air Force. Um, and they wrote back, and much to my surprise, I told the man that was helping me, James Klotz, he was the investigator for MUFON. I told him, don't say anything about UFOs. Just mention you could quote him quote verbatim from this book about these incidents, and we would like to have documents associated with these incidents. The Air Force wrote back, or one office of the Air Force wrote back and said, this is classified. However, since it has been classified for, I think it was a 12-year period, we're going to declassify the incident and we will send you documentation about it. And so they did. So the first time we received the documents, I decided to go public and state erroneously, by the way, that this was my incident. I was there and it involved UFOs hovering overhead during the missile shutdown. So I did. I I gave newspaper reporters report. I went on a radio station, the Art Bell Show, for example, and then I went on a TV show called Sightings, I think, early on, and I spoke about it as my incident. As it turns out, the reports that they declassified and the incident that was declassified was the Echo flight incident. That's the one I mentioned to you that my commander had turned to me and said the same thing happened in another flight. What happened to be this Echo flight, which happened 8 days earlier on March 16th. But in the description in this book, Above Top Secret, it sounded an awful lot like what I had recalled. And of course, at that time, 27 years later, I was a little fuzzy on the details, like who my commander was in the capsule and where we were at the time. So I thought, because it described what I generally recalled, that this was my incident. I had no idea, or I hadn't realized at that time, that there were two incidents that occurred very close to each other in time. Ours occurred March 24th, 1967. I was able to nail down that date from other witnesses, like I said, that had contacted me after I went public. I was getting phone calls and messages, etc., from other people who confirmed the date of the Oscar flight shutdown where we were, and that was the 24th. And the documents that were received confirmed March 16th as the Echo flight shutdown. Um, but it wasn't until 1996 or 2 years later that I was able to finally locate Colonel Mywald, who was then retired, of course, living in Henderson, Nevada. And we had a phone call, and he confirmed my recollection up to that point. Uh, and I always thought that all 10 of them shut down. He said, well, I thought it was more like 5 or 6. But he confirmed that we were not at Echo flight. We were at Oscar flight.
Now, so the
Was
shutdown
a
was
shock to my system there.
right. The shutdown, you mentioned that there was it was able to be proven that it was an external source. I would imagine that there might have been a diagnostic report.
Well, there was a Air Force, and this again was classified. There was a written report, and it's identified in one of the documents that we received, classified secret, on the investigation of the Echo flight shutdown. Now, that would have probably all the details of the Echo incident, including the engineering analyses of how this could have happened. But in the other documents I received, declassified, um, there was statements about this particular piece of hardware that I mentioned, the logic coupler. We found out that Boeing had done the bench test. We talked to the Boeing engineers. They gave us the exact signal strength, voltage, uh, the microseconds or milliseconds that the signal lasted, and the location of the logic coupler as to where the signal went, and and in that document it was concluded that this had to be an external signal because of the type of signal that they used during the bench test. There was nothing internal to the equipment that could have produced this particular signal.
So Boeing handled the diagnostic of this incident, and they
Well,
are
one of them, the Air Force may have done their own. The Air Force had their own laboratories working on this, uh, mainly out of Space and Missile Systems Organization in San Bernardino, I think.
all right. So they sequester the diagnostic information. It's classified, and of course, the testimonial evidence that for every person that was there directly involved, you have years going by. So again, this is got to be very stressful, and you managed it well by, you were patient. You waited until a book came out. Seeing that your incident was mentioned there, and then you began to file FOIAs and to speak openly. In terms of the response from the community, I understand that you handled this well, um, but as a human being, would you have liked to see more support from the community in terms of medical, mental health, first response relative to exposure for this?
Yes, as far as uh, mental health goes, of course, this was very stressful for me. Number one, I loved being in the Air Force. I was a career officer. Um, I went to Air Force Academy, and so I was hesitant to even um, uh, challenge the Air Force, but it became obvious to me that there was a definite cover up that was orchestrated, and they didn't want to deal with UFOs any longer, so they orchestrated this so-called Condon investigation, which was a farce from the beginning, and kept our incidents out of the final Condon report, even though they had the data to investigate more. So let me touch upon how the information got in above top secret about these incidents. There's a man by the name of Raymond Fowler who was working for Sylvania at the time of these incidents. Sylvania had an electrical contract with uh, the Air Force on the Minuteman I system, and he had uh, his people working at Malmstrom Air Force Base on this contract. They, after our incidents occurred, reported these incidents to Ray Fowler, their boss, and told him that there were UFOs sightings during these two incidents, Echo and Oscar. They gave him dates. They gave him information about individuals who had actually seen the objects during the incidents. And Ray Fowler wrote all this down and then contacted the Condon investigator a man by the name of Roy Craig, who was the chief investigator for Edward Condon, uh, and had him visit him. He presented all this information that he got from his people at Malmstrom. Uh, and so Craig promised to go to Malmstrom Air Force Base to look into it. He did. I've got that on audio tape again, where he confronted this base operations officer who was also working with the Condon Committee as a base UFO officer, um, working with them directly, and he essentially lied to Roy Craig during their meeting. Craig confronted him directly about UFOs being seen during these missile shutdowns. And he lied to him directly. I've got that on audio tape, and all that has been presented to the Arrow group, who's government group supposedly looking into this.
And I just want to be clear, you said he was the base UFO officer, so that was the actual title that he was given for his
Well,
assignment.
when the Condon Committee was formed, they asked the Air Force for individual names at each of the bases they were going to be visiting, uh, and that officer would be their liaison, someone to talk to about what went on there. And in our case, the base operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chase, um, was designated as that focal point, and they were termed base UFO officer. I gave them that
Interesting,
title.
interesting.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that, as we talk about this, that happened in 1967, and here we are in now 2025. There have been ongoing incursions at military facilities and in public over public property, and we still are trying to get a handle on what's actually happening. uh, you held on to this information for a very long time, but it's now becoming more in the public. What what would have been, other than the command or government officials telling you that you can't talk about this and having you sign an NDA, what would have been helpful immediately following your encounter, and what would be helpful today in light of the ongoing incursions that are happening right now?
Well, it would have been helpful if the Air Force had told the truth about these incidents, informed the public, and stated that they would be investigating this and then give the results to the public. I mean, we're talking about a critical weapon system, nuclear weapons. And by the way, every year the U.S. Department of Defense puts out a something called a nuclear posture review, where they review their nuclear posture and why they have nuclear weapons, and they reiterate every single year that these are a deterrent weaponry. In other words, they are intended to deter any sort of attack from another country because of the possibility that we could use them in retaliation. Of course, that's an unreasonable scenario because any use of nuclear weapons would, let's say against Russia or China even, would have an enormous impact. That war would have a devastating, catastrophic impact on the entire world, obviously. We cannot have a nuclear war and survive as a civilization, simply. And so it makes absolutely no sense to me now, where I sit now at this point in time, really to tell the world that this is a deterrence. And number one, it has only resulted in encouraging other countries to develop a nuclear deterrence. There's questions now about Iran restarting their nuclear weapons program. We have recently agreed with Saudi Arabia to provide them technical assistance on the development of nuclear power facilities. However, we did the same thing with India many years ago, and India, as a result of this exchange in technical data about nuclear power, were able to develop their own nuclear weapons program. India is now a nuclear weapons power in the world, as is Pakistan. Pakistan and India are currently at war over Kashmir. They could use so-called tactical nukes against each other at any time, which would again promulgate other countries to develop nuclear weapons and raise the risk of nuclear war. So the risk of nuclear war during this period of mutually assured destruction, MAD, or our country and others having this deterrent capability, has simply resulted in more nuclear weapons being existing on the planet, and that could be used anytime. Russia has already threatened to use the tactical nukes against Ukraine if they are attacked, and they have been attacked in their own, in Russia by Ukraine. So that threat is still out there.
So let me ask you this. Again, 1967, the development of nuclear weapons is still relatively in its early stages, with only one deployment or one incident of deployment of two bombs to end World War II. We had this incident where the missile silos were disabled. Do you have any thoughts on who was behind this in your incident? What do you think? What do you think this is?
Well, these objects that were described by my security guard as not being aircraft, or any aircraft that he could point to. And what I knew about aircraft from my service in the Air Force, these were not aircraft that we had in our inventory, and certainly no other country could have done what this object apparently did, uh, as I described. So I have to conclude these objects, these uh, uh, are not from planet Earth. It's as simple as that.
So, so what we do know without projecting where they are or are not, what we have is a disablement of these missiles. As far as why this was done, what would be your speculation as to why those missiles were disabled?
Okay, my speculation, again, it's just my own conclusion after thinking about this for 35 some years, uh, is that they were sending us a message, uh, and the message is, as I stated, uh, it makes no sense for humans to have these weapons of massive destruction that could literally wipe out all life on Earth if used in wartime. And we are prone to war, as uh, anybody can see. Uh, we simply have one war after another, it seems. And as I said, the number of nuclear bombs, weapons is growing, has grown over the years. And nuclear nations, right now, there are 9 nations that possess nuclear weapons, and that number is bound to grow.
And that's an important point because we have an incredible show of what is perceivably intelligent force, force being the disablement of nuclear warheads by your perception, and I imagine the perception of others who were there, uh, perceived that this was done intentionally and possibly to send a message that this is not something we should be doing yet. We have, and when I say we, the human civilization, nations around the world, have continued to develop nuclear weapons to the point of being able to accomplish global planetary destruction. If this was a message, what do you think is next? What it seems like we're not getting the message. So what is it going to take to change our course?
Well, we had, uh, I don't know if you remember the START One Treaty. I think it was called the START One Treaty that President Obama concluded with Russia when he was in office. And part of that agreement was to reduce the stockpile of each nation, Russia and the U.S., uh, and to have uh, an objective of going to zero. In other words, uh, get rid of all nuclear weapons that we had. This has to be done, of course, in cooperation and coordination with all nuclear powers. There's got to be inspections, but uh, it can be done. In fact, this was part of that START One treaty with Russia. Uh, and we were sending inspectors over there. They were coming here to inspect our facilities and our stockpiles, etc. But when President Trump took office in 2017, I guess. That treaty was well uh, no longer in effect, I guess, and and also the treaty, not the agreement we had with Iran was also dismantled, and so Iran was free to continue their quest for a nuclear weapon. So uh, I think the lesson from history is that we cannot think that we cannot get rid of all our nuclear weapons. It's possible. We just have to make a concerted effort to do that.
Absolutely. So, on the question, because there's wide speculation as to what these current present day drone incursions are, on the chance that any one of these could be of non-human origin, what do you say to the sentiment that we still can't be told about it because it would cause public panic, or the government doesn't have adequate resources to address it, so it's better not to say anything? What do you say to that, and as a reason to not disclose this to the public?
That's a ridiculous argument. Uh, we all have to, as adults, face facts, many facts as we're moving through life. And this, if it's established that we are being visited by non-human intelligence, I think the public worldwide will be able to handle that fact and deal with it. Uh, and I think it would be important to know that uh, these non-human individual, whatever they may be, are encouraging us to, let's say, be a more responsible uh, civilization within the local galaxy, and work towards abolition of these weapons of massive destruction.
Very well put. So, in light of the growing concerns of nuclear war and the resistance of our government to share the information that the public is desirous of to confirm what is actually happening, I want to turn back to the internal effects that this has had on you and is having now. We're not getting any younger, and as we get older, our concern is for our loved ones. How does the current state of affairs affect your emotions and your prospects for the future?
Well, I'm committed to disclosure, government disclosure of, um, and so I have that motivation. I'm not, at times, of course, I feel a little frustrated, but it's not debilitating. I just keep moving, keep going, keep trying, and I will keep trying. I can't pinpoint any negative effects, and we'll talk later about another incident that occurred to me. And No, I just feel like I'm on a mission. I've got to try to do the best I can to complete that mission. And that mission is disclosure of the facts of my incident and many others uh, similar to my own that have occurred for public information, public knowledge, and so that we can all work together on whatever may come.
Thank you for that. We all hope for that. Uh, as far as an ask, a right now ask, if you had the ability to give direction that would be followed up on, what would you like to see our government do differently in terms of response and support for people who experience encounters such as yours?
Yeah, I certainly like to have the government, um, first of all, give a blanket, um, let's say, a blanket okay to any witness who has been obliged to maintain secrecy on this subject so that they can come forward and speak openly about it. Like you say, a lot of these people, and I know some who would love to speak openly, but they fear retaliation uh, or worse. Uh, uh, and that would go a long way if the federal government allowed more witnesses to come forward and to find out exactly which um, things have been discovered about non-human intelligences. There are craft that have been recovered. There are bodies that have been recovered, and I'm certainly convinced that studies have been done on both of those, and there's much information that's available, and we need the truth. We simply need to deal with the truth of the matter, and so that's what I would do if I had the power to do it.
Well, I thank you for that, and we hope that that happens.